just as all sorts of realms, when one deals with messy, complicated problems that you need to think about in some wildly interacting way, we all have a strategy that we come up with. A strategy to make things easier, which is that we think in categories. We think in categories, we take things that are continua and we break them into categories, and we label those categories. And we do that in various settings because it could be extremely useful. For example, somebody give me an estimate on how long this line is. A foot. Okay, people who said a foot, what is it that went through your head to figure it out? You imagined how long a ruler is. This is 11.5 inches because it's 11 inches and 8.5 by 11. But everybody in here has this category in their head, things that are kind of the same length as a ruler. A continua of lengths, and there's a category for that. Suppose I'm telling you I have some friend who's a runner, he runs the mile, he's incredibly fast. In fact, he's one of the best runners in the country at this point. How fast does he have to have run the mile or better for you to be deeply impressed? Under 4 minutes, and thus we have another categorical boundary there of there's an infinite variety of speeds with which you can run a mile, yet we have in our heads this boundary, people who are under 4-minute milers, you are very impressed with. Another example of it, here we have 4 objects, and as drawn here, simply because we have categories to describe the first 3, do one of those tests of show people a bunch of shapes and they come back an hour later and ask them, have you seen the shape before? And people are going to be far more accurate with this than whether they saw this or not, because we don't have a word for it. We don't have a word that's at all sort of analytical, it's some squiggly whatever. We don't have a clear-cut category. Thinking in categories makes it easier for us to remember stuff, and it makes it easier for us to evaluate stuff. So that's a classic sort of response that we have cognitively to complicated things. But there's a bunch of problems with categorical thinking. First example, and first one you can see from a realm of language differences, in that not only is there a continua of infinite number of wavelengths, there's a continua of sounds that humans can make. And different languages draw boundaries at different points as to what count as similar sounds or different sounds. There's like 2 different TH sounds in English, which apparently we're not very good at hearing, but there's other ones we are. And that will affect your ability to remember stuff, what word it was, depending on whether it is on a dramatically different boundary, whether it is sound that sounds different to you or not. Example of this. Apparently in Finnish, people do not differentiate between the sound of a B and the sound of a P, whereas we have no trouble with that. But people from Finland do not make that differentiation, and I discovered this one day a number of years ago, where for reasons I don't even understand, I found myself needing to take testicular biopsies on baboons. Not having sort of learned that in junior high how you do that, I called up this guy at urology at the med school who happened to be Finnish, and I explained to him what I wanted to do, and he sort of took me through the paces and told me what thingy I needed to buy and that sort of stuff, and holiday packages of those where you can get a dozen, and sort of telling me how to do that. And once we went through, he said, what I want you to do, the thing to do at this point is get some practice. I want you to practice on a bear. What? He said, yeah, practice on a bear. And I said, are you kidding me? He said, I know it sounds crazy, but we have all the residents do that. It's a very good learning device. You know, either practice on a bear or an apple. Here we see the dangers of making mistakes about differences between B and P under certain circumstances. So we see one of the dangers there, which is when you are paying too much attention to categories, you can't differentiate 2 facts that fall within the same category. Next example. Remember back at various points of anxiety during exams and such back when, where there was a world of difference between getting a 65 on a test and a 66 on a test. Not particularly different, but because there's this boundary drawn there between passing and failing, there is this dramatic differentiating we make. When you put up boundaries, you have trouble seeing how similar things are on either side of it. We think in categories, but as you just saw, there are these problems. First one being, when you think in categories, you underestimate how different two facts are when they fall in the same category. When you think in categories, you overestimate how different they are when there happens to be a boundary in between them. And when you pay attention to categorical boundaries, you don't see big pictures.